Hi, it's Miss Jessica. We're gonna make masks today. So we're gonna make pleated masks like this, which tie on and they're modeled after a surgeon's mask. So a surgeon's mask is pleated and it expands, which allows you to cover your nose and your mouth all the way up to your chin. In the back of our mask, we're actually going to create a pocket, which also lets you place a filter into it. So you can place a filter inside or even another mask in case you want to keep that one fresh. So it can act as a mask cover. So this one is created from just plain white fabric, but we're going to use a more fun fabric, which will kind of make the mask wearing a little more fun for us. So I'm going to go over the materials that we need, and you can also find the mask pattern, which will be combined with this video, and that will help you as well. All right, see you in a minute. You will need a woven piece of fabric that is preferably 100% cotton or a cotton blend. It needs to be 15 inches by 9 inches. You will also need twill tape or ribbon, preferably something that is not slippery, and you will need 2 pieces of this, each piece being 36 inches long. Okay, so we're back and you've already got your materials list. You should have your piece of fabric and the pattern that goes along with this video. I have already folded my edges all around my piece of fabric. I've already folded them under and I've stitched them down. So you can see that I've stitched all my edges down. And I have used a heat erasable pen to mark all of my lines, my pleat lines and my overlap lines. Now if you don't have a heat erasable pen, don't worry. You can use chalk or any other marking tool. You can also use pins and mark your measurements with pins as well. So there are multiple ways to mark. So don't worry if you don't have that pen. So now I am actually going to fold over. I marked on the back side of my fabric. You can mark on the front as well, but I wanted you to see it and it's a little more clear on the back. I am going to fold my fabric over. I want this to happen on the front side. And I am going to overlap that 1.5 inch overlap. So that way, and this is our pocket. So that way it matches up from side to side, and I'm going to center it. So you can see that it is centered right here. And then I can take a pin and pin it. And I want to make sure it pins all the way through the fabric, back and front. I want to make sure it pins all the way through. Okay. And then I can flip this over to the front side of the fabric. You can also leave it on the back, it's okay, but I like to work from the front side of the fabric. We are going to do the pleats next. When we do the pleats, we can use the same marking tool. Again, I told you I marked on the back side of the fabric. I may actually also mark on the front side for this demonstration just to make it easier. So you can mark on the front and the back as long as you have a marking tool that will erase or wash out. But really you want something that erases, or what you can do is use your pins again, and I can see all my pleat marks on my back side, and I can just use my pins to transfer my pleat marks. So that way I know where I need to pleat. So you can do that as well, and you can transfer your pleat marks. So we're gonna come back for pleating in 1 minute, and I'll see you soon. Okay, so we're back. You can see I have my pleats marked with pins on the side. So the wide marks are where my pleats are. The skinny breaks are where the breaks in the pleats are. So I'm just gonna take my fabric, and I wanna make sure I'm pleating the whole thing. So not just the front side, but both sides. I take it, I fold it up, I take the pins out, and I repin that fold. And I'm gonna do the same with the next one. So I fold up, I take the pins out, and I repin that fold. And I'm going to do the same with the next one. Now you are going to pleat over that overlap in the back, which is that pocket, and that's okay. I'll show you that when I'm done pleating. So, oops, took that pin out early. And I'm gonna pin that down on the other side. And so you just continue to do this until all your pleats are pinned down. So I have one more. You should have 3 pleats. Okay, so I have 3 pleats in my mask. So all of you can probably see this. I have 3 pleats, and in the back, I also have a pocket. So all we're gonna do next is stitch a straight line right along the side to anchor down each pleat. And we already have a seam there because of when we stitched the sides down, when we folded the edges down and stitched them. So we're just going to follow the seam line that we already have. So it makes it pretty easy. So I'll see you by the sewing machine. Okay, so now we're at the sewing machine and we're going to sew these pleats down. So I'm gonna place my mask underneath the foot of my sewing machine, and I only wanna stitch where the pleats are. So I don't need to start at the top. I just need to start where the pleats are. I'm gonna place the foot down, and I wanna place my needle inside the fabric. So I press my needle button. If you don't have a needle button, then you just roll your hand wheel towards you and place the needle inside the fabric. So I'm always going to start with a forward stitch, and then I'm going to do a back stitch for 5 seconds. I'll put my foot on the pedal. I'll stitch forward for 5 seconds, and then I'll stitch back for 5. Now, you are sewing over bulk. You're sewing over a lot of fabric with the pleats. So my best recommendation is to lower the speed on your machine if you have speed control. If you don't have speed control, then don't put as much pressure on the pedal with your foot. Allow the machine to go a little slower and sew over that fabric slowly and carefully. So I'm going pretty slow over the bulky part. Make sure you're using a needle that is not for delicate fabric. A needle for your machine that's not for delicate fabric. Also, do not sew over pins. Always take your pin out and put it in a pin cushion. Don't leave the pins in while you sew. Only allow the pins to stay in to hold the fabric together. We always take the pins out before we stitch over that part. When you get to the end, you back stitch again for 5 seconds. And then you can cut your thread, lift the foot, and pull it out of the machine. And you will see that you've stitched your pleats down. So I'm going to sew down the other side, and then we're going to place our ties on it, and we're almost done. So you can see sewing a mask is not so difficult. All right, so I'll see you in a minute after I sew down the other side. Okay, so we're on the last part of the mask, and I'm using something called twill tape for my straps. You can use ribbon. Just try and make sure it's more of a grosgrain ribbon or something that's not so slippery. Otherwise, it'll have a hard time tying behind the head. So I'm going to use my twill tape. I have 2 pieces cut, as you saw in your materials section of this video. I have 2 pieces cut, each of them at 36 inches. I take each piece and I find the center by folding it in half. And then I take that center point and I place it in the center of the side of the mask. I place the twill tape or ribbon over that seam that I just sewed, the top stitch. I place it over and I can pin it down just to anchor it. So you can see I have both pieces pinned over, so it's covering that stitch that I made before. And now I am going to sew this down. And the way I'm going to sew it is by top stitching it right over the seam that I just made. So I'm going to take my mask and I'm going to put it back in my sewing machine and I'm going to sew it. So I'll see you in 1 second by my sewing machine. Okay, so now we're going to sew our twill tape or our ribbon over our seam or our top stitch. I place it all underneath the foot of the machine. I place the foot down. I place the needle in. This time I'm starting at the end of the mask and I'm going to the other end. You'll notice I took my pin out. Once the ribbon is, or the twill tape is anchored underneath the foot of the machine, it gives you some grip and you're able to pull and hold it and line it up over that seam. So you don't really need the pin anymore to hold it. And it's much easier to sew this way. You can still use the pin if you need it, but make sure you're taking it out as you're sewing. You don't want to sew over that pin. So I'm going to sew in the center of my ribbon or twill tape. My twill tape is only 1/4 of an inch wide, so I can sew in the center. Let's say you have a ribbon that's 1/2 inch wide, then I would stitch on the edge of each side of the ribbon. So it depends on what the width is of what you're using and the material that you're using. So I'm going to sew. Remember, I sew forward for about 5 seconds and then I back stitch for about 5 seconds. And I keep stitching forward. I go slow over those pleats because they're bulky. I stop and I back stitch. I take my needle, I lift my needle, I pull out my thread and it's already cut. My machine cuts thread, so that's really nice. If your machine does not cut thread, then you pull your threads out and you trim with scissors, or you should have a thread cutter on the side of your machine. So now I'm ready to do my other tie. I'm going to take my pin out, put the foot down, and place my needle in. I start sewing for 5 seconds. I stop and I back stitch, and I keep stitching. Remember, if it gets bulky, go slow and you can kind of pull from the back to keep it from sticking. And now you can see I have my tie-on mask. I can open it up. It'll fit perfectly on multiple size faces, and I have a pocket. And I can put a filter in that pocket. So it works really nicely. So I can tie it on just like this. And put it behind my ears on the top. and then tie the bottom. Just like that. Obviously I tie it in a bow more. And the fun part about this is that you can also mix and match fabrics. So you can design your mask to be whatever you want it to be. So play around with your fabrics. Make sure your fabrics are 100% cotton. They can also be cotton blends as long as they're woven fabrics and as long as they're a tight weave. And a tight weave means that you can't really see any holes in the fabric. So you want the fabric to be a fabric that you can't really see anything through it. And you want to make sure, because we're pleating it like this and we have it doubled over, it's multiple layers of fabric, so that's what works really well. So as long as you're using that for your fabric, you're doing a good job and your mask should work really well. Okay, so I hope you have a good time making your mask. I hope you find it not too difficult. If you have any questions, hopefully you can reach out to me, and good luck. All right, I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.